When we think of Christmas, a familiar image appears almost instantly. Soft lights glowing in the darkness, gentle angels singing in the night sky, a peaceful scene wrapped in wonder and warmth. But let me ask you a question that sounds simple yet is deeply unsettling. If this child was truly the Son of God, why was he not born in a palace? We often assume the answer is obvious. Poverty was accidental. The manger was a last resort. There was simply no other choice, but what if that assumption is wrong? What if the manger was not the result of rejection, but the result of intention? What if this was not a story of misfortune, but a carefully chosen starting point? Because a manger is not just a location, it is a statement, a declaration that quietly defies everything humanity believes about power, greatness, and authority. And if that is true, then the birth of Jesus was not humble by necessity, it was revolutionary by design. To understand why, we must look beyond the familiar story and uncover what the manger was truly meant to say. The birth of Jesus did not occur in a romanticized pastoral scene, nor was it the result of mere misfortune. When the gospel writers describe a lack of lodging in Bethlehem, they are not documenting a logistical inconvenience, but marking a deliberate historical and theological coordinate. Bethlehem, a small ancestral town, was overwhelmed by an influx of travelers due to imperial registration. Housing in first-century Judea bore little resemblance to modern inns. Most dwellings were multi-use spaces, often incorporating areas where animals were kept, especially during colder seasons. The manger, commonly imagined today as a rustic decoration, was in reality a feeding trough located at the lowest and least honored section of the household structure. This detail matters precisely because the gospel authors were not prone to embellishment. They were economical with words. If the mention of a manger were incidental, it would have vanished into obscurity. Yet it became one of the most enduring images in human memory. This invites a necessary question. If this were merely about a lack of space, why has this specific detail been preserved and remembered for over 2,000 years? Human logic follows a familiar equation. Power convinces, authority commands, and royalty demands reverence. From this perspective, a divine arrival should naturally unfold in a palace surrounded by symbols of dominance and legitimacy. History, however, offers a sobering counterpoint. Kings who arrive by force often rule by fear, and fear may secure obedience, but rarely transformation. Empires built on power rise swiftly and collapse just as dramatically. Authority imposed from above produces submission, not renewal. This forces a theological confrontation with our assumptions. If the purpose of divine intervention is to restore humanity rather than intimidate it, would fear be an effective instrument? Would a God seeking genuine relationship require subjects or invite children? The manger stands as a rejection of coercive authority. It signals a form of power that does not crush from above, but approaches without threat. A power that does not demand submission, but waits to be received. A manger is not a throne. It is not elevated, adorned, or defended. It exists for one purpose: to sustain life. In placing the child there, the narrative communicates meaning without proclamation. This is symbolic theology at its most restrained and potent. The location itself becomes the message. Not a throne, therefore not domination. Not a palace, therefore not separation. Not elevation, therefore not distance. The manger represents provision rather than possession. It suggests that divine authority does not require height to be valid. Instead of ruling by separation, this God chooses proximity. Consider the psychological effect of space. Grand halls create silence and restraint. Kitchens and feeding spaces invite presence and familiarity. If God's intent were accessibility rather than awe, the manger would be the most precise location imaginable. This raises a deeper question for the listener. If trust is the goal, not fear, where would God choose to begin? Equally striking is the identity of the first witnesses. The announcement bypasses kings, generals, and scholars. It avoids institutions of power and prestige. Instead, it reaches shepherds, individuals on the margins of society, often viewed as unreliable and unrefined. From a narrative construction standpoint, this choice is baffling. If one were crafting propaganda, credibility would demand elite witnesses. Yet the gospel narrative does the opposite. This inversion suggests intentionality. Truth is entrusted not to those with influence, but to those with openness. Those without status have nothing to protect, nothing to lose, and therefore nothing obstructing their response. Here the pattern becomes unmistakable. Divine revelation does not seek endorsement from power, it bypasses it. And this invites a question that unsettles modern audiences as much as ancient ones. If the greatest truth was first revealed to those least trusted by society, what does that say about where truth prefers to dwell? The manger is not an isolated symbol. It aligns with an unbroken trajectory. The beginning occurs at the lowest spatial level of human dwelling. The ministry unfolds among the poor, the sick, and the socially invisible. The end arrives in a form of execution reserved for humiliation and deterrence. This is not coincidence. It is coherence. Salvation in this framework does not descend from the summit of power. It emerges from the depths of human vulnerability. Redemption does not arrive as a command. It grows as accompaniment. Rather than standing above humanity to rescue it, God enters the human condition at its weakest point. The movement is not downward to dominate, but downward to lift. This reframes the entire concept of divine greatness. Not greatness proven by elevation, but greatness revealed through nearness, which leads to the most unsettling implication of all. If God once chose the lowest place to begin, perhaps the places we consider too broken, too insignificant, or too unworthy are precisely where divine presence still prefers to appear. Christmas, then, was never meant to be a fairy tale, nor was it simply a festival of lights, gifts, and celebration. Christmas was a choice that stood in direct opposition to how the world defines power, greatness, and glory. The greatest miracle of Christmas was not angels flying across the night sky, nor signs blazing from the heavens above. It was a God who dared to step into the lowest place, a God who chose to appear where humanity prefers not to look, a God who began among the forgotten, the overlooked, the unworthy. And if God once chose a manger, then perhaps even now He is still seeking out the places in our lives we believe are too broken for the divine to enter. That is history recorded and remembered. But what about you? What do you think about that choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read them, we listen, and we value every perspective. And if you would like to continue exploring the hidden truths, the overlooked meanings, and the deeper mysteries of the Bible with us, consider subscribing to the channel. Because sometimes the events that change history forever begin in the very places we once chose to ignore.